Okay then, folks, guys and dolls, biology lesson number 2. I thought I'd jump on. Oh, my microphone is going to be in the background. Okay, so I thought I'd jump on a couple of minutes early. Well, I'm only 2 minutes early now. It's amazing how time flies. I'm just going to show you how to find the exambulance, the study at home exambulance, so you can basically have some structure whilst learning the rest of the year 12 content. Do everyone here who's in the chat right now, are you already enrolled in the exambulance or not? Give me a yes, no to that. I will, oh, I've got a bunch of crazy tabs open. Let's just pull up a fresh one, I reckon. In fact, I don't think it's going to like that. So I don't know how to select a specific tab. I can select a specific application, but not necessarily a specific tab. Okay, for those of you watching the recording, you might not all know, I'm just going to, this is actually also going to probably move, but on the Tailored Tutors website, I'll try to put a link in the description. If it's not there right now, I'll update it after I've finished my year 13 live, which will be in a couple of hours. So just tailoredtutors.co.uk, and then you'll see the study at home exambulance, and you can choose the biology one, sign into the course, and you'll end up basically inside here, which has got all of the AS study schedule. I suppose that's what we're doing right now. I was just planning my A-level study schedule. You've got all the MID sheets. We're going to come on to the actual past papers later on. So there's basic strategies for you AS students is to complete the content with us live. Obviously, we're going to be 45 minutes a day, so there's going to be limited time for AS content. All the exam guide and content guide, all the kind of stuff that is there if you want to support yourself and, you know, make sure that you're not getting behind. I think the major concerns for year 12s is going to be that you will not have time if you start in September for you to catch up on all the stuff you've not done this year, plus do all the stuff that you're supposed to do next year. That's going to be ridiculously stressful. So entering into next year, being one step ahead is the way that you're going to give yourselves the best shot coming out of this on top. So the first phase, completing the content. Then we're going to do phase 2, working through some past papers, teaching some good exam techniques, some good revision methods. And then we're going to get ahead the yellow phase down here on the year 13 content. Okay, let's stop that sharing so I don't go and share myself, looking at myself in a YouTuber loop. Right then. Any questions? I'm going to do a bit of adaptation. People say they wanted to do some questions yesterday. I'm going to run through one set of notes and then maybe look at some questions. I mean, natural selection is like, wow. I mean, most biologists are idolize Darwin, and having that idea is such a simple idea, but nobody had ever thought of it before. And now we look back, it seems so obvious that, of course, that's what's happening, that there's a little bit of variation introduced and we're all a little bit different from one another. That's very obvious. And that just the conditions in which we live in, some people are better adapted to that environment. And as a result, they find life easier. They're more likely to have more children and pass on more of those genes. Obviously, Darwin didn't know about genes, and all of modern genetics basically stacks on top of that. Yeah, there's a few quirks, epigenetics, and a few things that true Darwinian natural selectionists would never have sort of really taken into account, that things could be heritable and non-genetic. But there's basically Darwinian basics of genetics and inheritance is, there's not been anything that has disproved it. Okay, so let's just start, shall we? I'm a little bit of a loss. I'll share my, again, more key terms I'm going to go through with you today. I'm hammering you on these, but only because they are super important. So again, let me just extract the chat here so I can still see it. And then I think this has to come a little bit narrower. I think we're in a good spot here. It should be, maybe actually make this a bit bigger and shunt that over there. I think this will do. Okay. Are you ready? Pen, paper, all that jazz? Let me just check that. iPad. Yep. This is relatively simple to get your head around, but I'd say it's answering the questions is not always that straightforward here. Although, yeah, I'm going to show you some questions and you're actually going to see the patterns that recur throughout all of this. So let's start with the red pen. More definitions, key terms in red. So I'm going to go genetic diversity first of all. Why are you not letting me write? Oh, because I've selected the wrong thing. That's why. I mean, obviously, it does pretty much what it says on the tin there. So it's the number of different alleles of a gene in a population. I mean, some of you need to do things like the percentage of polymorphic gene loci, things like that. I'm not going to go into mega detail there because, again, it is, I'm going to keep this as generic to all exam boards as possible. So how much diversity is there? Well, you've got a gene. How many versions, how many alleles of that gene do you have? The more versions you have, the more, if the environment changes, then basically it's like how many cards have you got in your deck. If you've only got one card, you can play it as long as the environment lets you play it. But suddenly, if the environment changes and you need to play a different card and you've only got one, then you're basically out of luck. Template, I mean, obviously there's 5 words and some arrows written on this. So I just start, if you don't have the template, just start from scratch. And if you do have they're all in the course, of course, I will try and put the link to the PDF in the description for afterwards, but you won't have time to print it out now anyway. So, you know, I say the number of different alleles of a gene in a population. Obviously, you might have 2 separate populations of the same species. One of them may be different diversity between those 2. So I'm actually just going to do a little experiment here and see whether, oh, I don't think it's going to let me. No, I can't change this. I don't think I can make my preview bigger. Next up, natural selection. You don't really have to be able to define these very often, but it is good to know what they are. The ones that you had to remember, I put an asterisk next to yesterday. So individuals that are basically best adapted to the environment, so that's the genotype and the phenotype, are more likely to survive and reproduce. So I'm going to say individuals best suited to the environment. Will be more likely to survive and reproduce. And obviously the things that control their adaptations are both genetic, so genotype and phenotype. Now I'm going to, let's say, to pass their alleles. On to the next generation. You can say adapted or suited. Yeah. The adaptation's best adapted. Yeah. I was just, I suppose, grammatically trying to avoid using adapted twice, but yeah, okay. Best adapted is totally fine. Evolution, as defined by the spec, will be a change in allele frequency over time. So if you were to take like a snapshot of time, you might find that 20% of the population have this particular allele of that gene, and 80%, if they've only got 2 alleles, 80% have the other allele. Maybe the environment changes, which means that there's an advantage of having what was previous, let's say it's tall and dwarf. They were the examples we're using in meiosis today. So maybe 20% are tall, 80% are dwarf. Maybe there's more rainfall, which means that suddenly it's like plants don't have the limiting factor of water restriction anymore. So being tall is now probably a benefit because you can outcompete the dwarf plants for light, something like that. And so over time, as the environment changes first, it causes a change in selection pressures, which is then going to drive the alleles to follow. Basically, the phenotypes are always going to chase. The environment's going to change first, because if the environment stays the same forever, that's why rainforests are so diverse. Their environment has been pretty stable for millions of years. It allows you to become more and more specialist because the conditions are the same. You can get sort of like more competition, and it's called niche packing. You don't need to know that for the spec, but you can just become more and more specialist. Okay. What else do we need to know about this? Okay, we can say, in general, there's a bit of a standard kind of, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, things we want to say, we'll talk about when we're talking about adaptations, and it can blend into speciation. Obviously, if adaptations carry on for long enough, eventually the populations would diverge, and then you're not going to be able to interbreed to produce fertile offspring. That's going to mean that you've basically got speciation taking place. So things to say there, we can say variation, we can say the alleles exist in the population. Variation. I just put it in brackets of alleles. So it's exist population. What causes that variation? In terms of new alleles, not a shuffling of alleles, not a recombination of genes or chromosomes. What causes new alleles to be produced? Mutations. Okay, so as a result of mutation. Oh. Then you're going to get selection for the individuals with those beneficial alleles. Obviously, most mutations are going to change alleles. Most of them are going to be deleterious. They're going to be negative. So they're just going to be selected against. They're more likely to go extinct. But in the rare occasions where you get a mutation that causes a protein which is more effective or gives them some kind of adaptive advantage, then it's selected for, more likely to be passed on, and therefore it increases in allele frequency. And then that's our definition of evolution, that change of allele frequency. Result of mutation. So there's selection for individuals with the beneficial alleles. You could say advantageous. Usually the questions in the exam are going to give you a scenario, like why these subspecies of elephant have bigger ears, and like why might that be an advantage? Well, if they're living in a hotter climate, that might be because it's increasing their surface area to volume ratio, allows them to do so. It's a good point here in your answer just to link this into the question, if you can. There's a nice phrase that I like to use, I'd say, is differential reproductive success. What do I mean by differential reproductive success? Those that are more or better adapted are more likely to survive, first of all, then to reproduce and obviously pass on their allele. So exactly, that's what I mean by differential reproductive. So not everyone is equally reproductively successful. This causes a change in allele frequency. over many generations. Or you could say a long time. Okay, so I'd say this natural selection, it results in it's natural, right? So the nature or the environment is sculpting the gene pool. And when you really start to think about these things in sort of evolutionary context, you're really only thinking about the gene pool. You don't think about the individual too much, that the environment shapes the gene pool, which genes are selected for. It gets hotter, so the genes that are better adapted or make those organisms better adapted for surviving, maybe they're better at sweating, or they're better at dissipating heat, or they're better at conserving water, maybe they've got a longer loop of Henle. Those adaptations, you only really think about the gene pool rather than thinking on the individual level. Obviously, it's being played out by us at the individual level, but the gene pool is slowly shifting, and it's shifting because of the environment changing. So I'm going to say it results in species being better adapted to their environment. And then I'm going to talk about what do I mean by adaptations. I'm going to say they can, or can be ... So what are the three types of adaptations, the three categorizations of how might you adapt as an organism to a changing conditions? What might natural selection drive us towards? Physiological. What do we mean by physiological? Yes, those. Okay, good stuff. Yes, physiological is your internal body reactions, basically your physiology. So yeah, how well you internally cope with things. Next up, I'm going to go with which one? I'm going to split them. I'm going to go behavioral. Okay, so maybe you start becoming nocturnal because it's cooler at night, or because there's more food availability at night, or predation risk is less at night. So yeah, so behavioral and anatomical. Sometimes people get these things confused with sort of physiological. Again, think of anatomical as being, I don't know, they're growing longer legs, bigger wings, or maybe it's a like camouflage patterning on your anatomy. So yeah, and physiological will be enzyme pathways, the biochemistry, the smaller detail inside your body. Your anatomy is pretty much your physical structure and outside the body, and obviously behavior pretty much explains itself. Okay, so let's just put all of that on the page so you can see it all. I thought I'd line up some questions to show you this in this. The theory here is not difficult. The application of it can be a bit tricky. Physiological adaptation would be, yeah, the mutation to an enzyme, or the gene in it that codes for an enzyme that makes its active site more complementary to its substrate, increases the rate of reaction of an enzyme catalyzed reaction. For example, pick one in Krebs cycle or something like that. Succinate dehydrogenase, although you don't need to know any of those type things, but yeah, an enzyme that improves its functionality. What is the difference between natural selection and differential reproductive success? Natural selection is the name of the process. If you get asked name the process, then the answer is most likely to be natural selection, if obviously in this context. Whereas differential reproductive success basically is, yeah, I mean, it's a differential reproductive success is those that have the adaptation. Yeah, I mean, it's very similar, although you won't see differential reproductive success would be used to explain a mechanism by which the process of natural selection is brought about. Let's say those that are better adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. Obviously, that's a bit of a mouthful, which is why over time the mark schemes will accept differential reproductive success. 3 words, easier to write. Just I like to be as condensed as I can in all my notes. Okay, so let's have a look here. I was showing my iPad for the entire session the other day. So any quick questions on any of that? Whilst I switch over here and line up some questions for you. I've got some Edexcel questions in here, whether they're specifically going to be on that. Let's have a look at these questions and ask me again at the end whether Edexcel, yeah, I mean, they certainly should. Yeah, no, they will, because like you're describing the action. I mean, you can write it out in other words if you want to. You can say those with the beneficial characteristics are more likely to survive and reproduce and pass on their alleles to the next generation if you want to. That's totally fine. If you feel like more comfortable saying that, then that's fine. Physiological, internal biochemical reactions, basically anatomical macrostructure, hands, feet, legs, wings, and body coloration. Okay, so let's go back in. There's always a pretty big delay when I start sharing my iPad. Okay, so I wonder if I can zoom in here just a little bit, they're a bit small. Okay, so we've got multiple choice first up. Which of the statements A to D does not provide evidence for natural selection? Okay, so I'm going to read these through. Effectively physiological on the inside and anatomical on the outside. Obviously, if you grow an extra finger, whether that's like debatable, we've got bones and stuff that are on the inside, growing an extra finger would be an anatomical or anatomy, but as a basic rule of thumb, yeah. Clover plant populations, so plant population produce higher hydrogen cyanide toxin, so let's just say toxin levels in areas where snails, so predators of plants, are common. We've got fossils of animals identical to species living today can be found in shallow rocks. We've got insects can rapidly develop resistance to insecticides, such as DDT. The example is irrelevant. Resistant forms of Staphylococcus aureus were not known before 1961. Okay, so we could say, we can tick these through. So plants where they're getting munched more by snails produce more of a toxin. Well, that is a response, it's an adaptation to a natural thing. I think this is most definitely a product of natural selection. Resistance. Basically, we've got resistance here and we've got resistance here. Well, resistance, again, you put in a selection pressure. You put in like, okay, here's a pesticide. Basically, all of the insects that are not resistant to that pesticide are going to die. Very steep selection pressure. Maybe 99.99% of the insect population die, but which ones survive? The 0.01%. And which ones are they? They're the ones with the genes or the alleles that are going to allow them to be resistant. So this is an example of natural selection, both of them. So why not fossils identical is the issue here? Because they're identical, it's the same species. So it's not, selection hasn't taken place. It's just, they're just ancestors. There's been no driving factor to change these organisms. They are just the same as they are today. So the answer here was B. Name the process. Okay, you can see that increases the proportion of a resistant bacteria in a population. I pretty much gave you this one on a platter because I told you. Yeah, so if you have to name the process here, I mean, Do any of you need to know about artificial selection? OCR would be the only people like that would potentially need to know about artificial selection, but that's when human beings are selectively breeding, for example. Why not the process? Why is not evolution? One of the things that, as I mentioned maybe 10 minutes ago, if it asks you for the process, you should be giving the term natural selection, because that's the process by which evolution takes place. Evolution is the change in allele frequency over time. This is not, this is, if we're looking at this is a penicillin resistant bacteria. So this is the phenotype. I would, survival of the fittest, again, all of these things, I would go with natural selection as the process. All examples are going to accept that. Survival of the fittest may be acceptable sometimes, but I would say, generally speaking, stick with natural selection. Okay, and then we've got tigers, are predatory mammals. They have evolved striped patterns on their fur, as shown on a diagram. Well, we all know what a tiger looks like. I decided not to put that in, to provide camouflage in their habitats. Adaptations can be divided into 3 types. State the type of adaptation for tiger stripes. Is it a behavior? No. Then you've got the difference between anatomy and physiology. Is it biochemically sort of inside? Is it the enzyme pathways, the metabolic pathways? No. It is anatomical. Okay, so we get to a little bit more tricky stuff here. This is a few more longer answer questions. Do I want to start here? Yeah, why not? No, I'm going to start over here, actually. I'm going to start, I've written Geo. There's a block of text, which is quite clear. I decided, let's zoom in here. It's quite clear that these 2 populations of elephant are geographically isolated. It doesn't say it in plain terms. One of them lives in this country, one of them lives in this country, and the habitat in between is not suitable for them. So it doesn't tell you this in so many words, but it's very easy to interpret this from the text. Again, I decided to simplify things given that we've got limited time. So we want to explain or give reasons, which whenever you see explain in your head, it's basically, it should be give reasons for. That's what the rubric says. Give reasons for how 2 species of African elephant could evolve from a common ancestor. We've got 3 marks. Okay, so we know that this is basically a speciation question. So there's a bit of overlap. The AS spec for most of you guys doesn't go as far as adaptation to the point where a new species is formed. I'm just introducing you to a bit early here, but this is very much in keeping with adaptation. If we keep going a little bit beyond adaptation, we adapt so much that you're no longer able to interbreed with the other populations to produce fertile offspring. Okay, so which type of speciation is this? Again, if you're an AS student, I'm not expecting you to know this. This is allopatric speciation. Okay, so the geographical barrier separates the original species in 2 groups. 2 areas have different conditions, meaning selection pressures are different in each area. Okay, so that's getting towards our answer, but we've got 3 things I would like to see, if we can, some nice, concise bullet points, like what's marking point 1 all about? There's actually probably going to be, because it's explained, there could well be 4, 5, 6 things on the mark scheme for this. I'm going to wait and get some responses to this first. going to see if I can find the bit that tells us that they're geographically separated, but it's not. They're forest elephants and savanna elephants, and it gives the location, African savanna, location, tropical forest of Central West Africa. So it tells us in the basically the table of data what that they're geographically isolated. So in this case, we get a mark for saying that they're geographically isolated because that wasn't given to us explicitly. It was in the question stem. We just had to pull it out and say that what does that mean? If they're geographically isolated, what means that they cannot do? I've lost my YouTube chat. Okay, so they're isolated. So I would say that they are reproductively isolated, which means there's no gene flow. If things can continue to breed with each other, genes are going to get passed backwards and forwards. It keeps everything as one general population. There's a mixing pot. The gene pool stays together. If there's something stopping them interbreeding, that could be behavior, it could be distance, it could be many things, then suddenly there's no linking, there's no flow of genetic material between the two, no sex basically going on, which means that they can diverge and go on their own separate journeys. So I think that in this, we would probably state allopatric speciation. If this was an AS paper, you wouldn't get a mark for allopatric speciation. I think this is probably from an A-level paper. Just looking at the question, I would say that there's different selection pressures, different. My phone's on Do Not Disturb. Josh must be in my favorites. So you have different, let's say, selection pressures. You could maybe say in different environments. What else is going to be I'm asking here? So we could say there's maybe that, maybe say there's differential reproductive success. Which causes a change in allele frequency over many generations. And seeing as we are talking about two species, you might want to then say that they are so different that they can't interbreed to produce fertile offspring. I would also, okay, self-check. What can we do in self-check here? Oh, you're not seeing my screen for some reason. Here we go. In this particular question, and maybe I can share you the PDF afterwards and tell you I was giving you this information because obviously I've just cut out the specific question I wanted to do. I'll show you the text that that tells me that it's geographically isolated. From the information that you've got, you can't tell that. Allopatric speciation is when there is geographical separation between the two populations. Sympatric speciation, both populations are in the same place at the same time, but they are reproductively isolated for another reason. Okay, let's just, what word have I not said in this? What's a good key term when we're self-checking? So in my question analysis, you're going to go through the command word and marks, first of all. I've said, I've got selection pressure in here, but I haven't said what I haven't said, I haven't said natural selection in here. It's the driving force behind evolution, right? Merging different selection in different environments. We could maybe say causes natural selection. I'm not sure that's quite the right wording, or drives, maybe. Natural selection. So there's a change in allele frequency over many generations. So that's a great little piece of exam technique right there. You finish your answer, nice clean bullet points. Yeah, I've tried to put one fact per bullet point, and then at the end, I've gone back, what have I not included? And I've not included a key term, natural selection. Well, I should probably put it in there. It's highly relevant. We're talking about evolution here, right? So it's the easiest way of self-checking yourself, to add in those key terms. A selection pressure is something that, when you get a change in environment, let's say there's a drought and the small trees with the shallow roots die. So only the tall trees with the higher leaves survive. So then only the taller grazing species, so those that are able to survive and reproduce, so the tallest in the population. So there's a selection pressure against being short, and there's a selection pressure pushing the gene pool towards the phenotypes that have the trait that is better able to survive and reproduce. So it's a pressure on selection, is which individuals are selected to reproduce. Okay, so let's get rid of, it's probably doing some crazy things. Let's move the answer over there. I'm not going to stay behind it. So actually, I don't want to just enlarge that one. I'm going to enlarge everything. So we've got two populations are geographically isolated. I'll show you the bit in the question paper that means that we can extract geographically isolated. There's reduced gene flow between the, I think reproductive isolation is between the two populations. She's the allopatric speciation. This is a year 2 topic, so don't worry too much about that if you are an AS student. There's different selection pressures leading to natural selection. Let me go back to the exam paper and I'll show you how we would tease out the fact that it's quite a long question. Okay, here we are. Let's change the share over. Million tabs open. Okay, maybe I can come in a bit tighter here. So this is the question stem here. Scientists have studied behavior, anatomy, and genetic variation in elephants. Table shows some of the information about 2 populations of African elephants. So we've got the forest elephant location, tropical forest of Central and West Africa. We've got the feeding behavior and anatomical differences, and then savanna, African savanna. So we've got basically information here. They're living in different locations, therefore they are geographically isolated. That is the kind of synthesis, the kind of what they're going to be expecting you to be able to do is extract that from the question stem and then make the leap that they are not in the same place. Therefore, they're geographically isolated. They are actually, it said, reduced gene flow rather than no gene flow. How can they be reproductively isolated in sympatric speciation? Well, let's say one becomes nocturnal and one's awake in the day, one's awake at night. So it's in the beginning, there'll still be some interbreeding, but if those populations, maybe it's a courtship behavior, maybe some crickets, they'll only mate if the courtship song, if the cricket song, the male song is right, and maybe there's just like a trend, a different, and they start not mating with the ones that don't make that noise. Okay, let's just skim over some of these other questions. I'm just a bit conscious of time. Okay, so let's look at these. Are you looking at my iPad again? No, you're not. Okay, so some grasses possess an allele. So there's an allele for copper tolerance. It's supposed to be an underline, I'll cross out. This allele allows them to grow in areas where there is a high concentration of copper. So it allows them to grow copper ions in the soil. Describe how natural selection has brought about different allele frequencies in the grass plants in these sites. Now here we've got 5 marks. So this is actually an Edexcel question. I like to try and include a bit of everyone. They are probably the most hot on natural selection. Okay, so give me some stuff here. What are we thinking? So we've got one has an allele of a gene that allows it to tolerate copper ions or greater concentration of copper ions in the soil. Yeah, so this is the variation with the allele, without the allele. Yeah, so we can say that the variation is caused by mutation. Now we want to, the command word here is describe. So we really want to be saying that, describing how does it happen? How do we get this change in allele frequency? We've got to really pay attention to that command word. Okay, so this is all giving us, yeah, so Megan, the mutations cause the allele, but here they already possess the allele. So I think it's not wrong to say that, but it's starting with them already having the allele. So if we put in 5 good points in here about how the allele arrives in the population, I don't know that's going to get us the marks here. So mutation, so selection pressure occurs. The beneficial allele is more likely to survive and pass on their offspring. Can we then tie it into the question a little bit here? So those that can tolerate copper will grow in the soil. Those that don't have the allele will be outcompeted or will not be able to survive. Selective pressures. Yeah, the selection pressure is the copper ions in the soil. They're more able to reproduce. Yeah, I think let's go through this and get rid of that off the top of the screen. So we've got, okay, so we do have the mutation. I wasn't sure that was going to be on the mark scheme. To be honest, I don't check the mark schemes beforehand because I like to try and answer it like a student, you know, so it gives rise to the allele for copper tolerance, which it allows to science. I mean, yeah, okay, so one for the mutation. Selection pressure, there is a greater concentration of copper ions in one area, so the copper ions are the selection pressure, so most of you grabbed all of that. Plants without the allele do not survive. There are fewer plants and reduced competition for resources. Oh, I don't like this mark scheme very much, but okay, I can understand why they've said that. Plants that survive pass on their allele to the next generation, therefore the frequency of the allele is higher, increasing the frequency of the allele. This was an Edexcel question. Yeah, Edexcel new spec, Edexcel A. Okay, look at these two. These are OCR Edexcel. Sorry, get it right third time. These two are AQA questions. These are back-to-back questions. Is it big enough for you to read if I put them side by side? Just let me know. Maybe what I can actually do is I'll just stick that off the screen down there, and then I should be able to. Okay, so we've got multiple copies of the AMY1 gene. This is basically produces amylase. So amylase for starch digestion is an adaptation to high starch diet. So suggest how this evolved through natural selection. And then I'm just going to look at the next question because we've got this text is the same. Multiple copies of the AMY1 gene is an adaptation to high starch diet. Use your knowledge of protein synthesis and enzyme action to explain the advantage of this adaptation. So why is it an advantage? got this wrong when I did my exam guide video on this. So I answer all the questions closed book in my exam guide, and I do obviously make mistakes in there. But this is the word that caused me a little bit of trouble in that paper. So what have we got here? So this is with how it evolved. Again, you probably want to be talking about the process by which evolution takes place. So there's a couple of keywords we definitely want to be including in there. Well, obviously, and this one, let's look at this one first. We're basically going to run out of time right now. Do you want to answer this one, or do you want me to talk you through the answer? I'll give you the two options: answer or talk through. I know it's early in the morning for you guys. Mutations cause the allele to be adapted to high starch diet. Advantageous allele is more likely to survive. So you've said the advantageous allele. Here we can name it if we want to, although most of you are down for just listening. Let's get rid of all of this. Okay, so we've got the mutation. Again, look how similar. Look at the pattern. Look at, okay, so then I'll show you my template now again. So mutation produces extra copies of the gene. Those with more copies survive better on a high starch diet and pass on multiple copies. They pass on the adaptation or the mutation to their offspring. This one is like a weird one. And the reason I got this effectively right, I answered with a very different answer that wasn't what the mark scheme wanted. Multiple copies of the ME1 gene. And obviously a gene can have many alleles. So I interpreted multiple copies to being multiple alleles. So I interpreted that they had various different alleles of the gene and therefore had a range of different enzymes that were similar but not the same, which allowed them to hydrolyze different sugars. But I'm guessing really where I went wrong is that we know that amylase digests starch. Starch basically has got one glycosidic bond. And if the enzyme had shown variation in its active site, really the bond is not changing. The substrate is remaining constant. So there's probably not actually that much of an advantage to having multiple different, slightly different active sites. Okay, so I interpreted this basically because it said gene, it didn't specify. If this had said allele, if it's got multiple copies of the same allele, then it's a different question. Then you know that the protein that's producing is exactly the same. And then they're asking the question, why is it better, or why is it an adaptation to a high starch diet of having lots of copies of the same gene, not lots of copies of similar but slightly different genes. So that was where I went wrong with this question. It's easily done, very easily done. So what's the advantage in using your knowledge of protein synthesis and enzyme action? Well, you have more transcription, which produces more messenger RNA. You have more translation, basically produces more of the protein or the enzyme in this case. And so you basically have, I don't know, the individual reaction is not faster, but the total conversion of starch into glucose will be faster because more enzymes are acting on it at the same time. My answer was essentially, so I interpreted many copies of the gene. Go check it out in the exam guide. I interpreted the question as many copies of the gene because it didn't say that it maybe had various different alleles. So if you've got 15 copies, there was a graph, and there was some individuals had 15 copies of this gene. And obviously that could be 15 different versions. They could have 15 different alleles, possibly. And that's how I interpreted that the multiple copies of the gene meant therefore multiple different alleles that would code for slightly different proteins, which would have slightly different impacts, which would then be a benefit because there's more sort of variation. You as an individual would have multiple alleles that would allow you to deal with these different things. That's how I interpreted the question. It was actually simpler than that. Really, it was like, how does having more copies of the same gene that digests starch, How is that a benefit? Well, more copies of the gene, you produce more messenger RNA, you make more copies of the protein, therefore you are more able to, well, I just said faster rate of reaction, do the thing. And then obviously if we were to develop that in terms of starch, we hydrolyze starch to make glucose, more glucose for respiration, more respiration to make more ATP for metabolic processes and stuff like that. Okay, so that is the end of our AS Action Hour. Different tactic for me today. I went much slower and I gave you some questions. So again, general feel on that style. Obviously, if we do like lessons like this, I'm mixing it up. I'm just gonna, do you prefer slower with a few questions, or do you prefer like content, drive through, get stuff done? Okay. Mind blowing. You always want some questions? Okay, so obviously by doing questions, that's going to, like, let's say we're going to do ish half an hour of content and then sort of ish 15 minutes of questions. What I'm going to do a bit more of then, if you like that, is I'm going to do some more question exercises with you. So a bit more exam techniques of pulling the information from the question so we know how to shape our answers, because that's one of the main skills. That's where my strong point is, and as a biology teacher, is that I know the biology, but like the skill, lots of people know the biology. That's not anything to be proud about. I know how they ask you those questions. So when I say, what's the process? And I tell you to write natural selection, that's the word to write, because I have done this so many times. I could prove it to you by spending half an hour pulling out 10 different questions across 5 different exam boards over the last 15 years and show you that that's consistent across all of them, or you can just trust me and take my word for it. Okay, go take a break, about 10 minutes. I'm gonna go set myself up, and I'll see you if you are year 13 for the year 13 class. Do hit the bell, like, follow, subscribe. We are trying to reach as many students as we can. So I teach biology, AQA, OCR, and Excel. I'm probably gonna add some other exam boards in the near future, but who knows what's going on with the current situation. I don't know when this is gonna end. I don't know, like I was supposed to be. My life is flipped upside down right now. I'm not here on Friday. I know the schedule says that I am. I'm not here on Friday because I'm on a plane again. I'm coming back to England. So see you tomorrow for your AS, and yeah, we'll see you then. And again, the playlist will be ready as soon as the recording's up. It will be in the playlist, so it's there for you to use. So let me just go find where my live streaming center is and go turn off my live stream. See you later.